So this is a review of an individual student report on a standards-based assessment measure for Ken Jones, who was in 7th grade. The test was administered in spring of 2002, which means it was at the end of the year. It was based on the state standards for Washington State. For Alaska, it would be the Alaska Core Standards. And the purpose of it is to help teachers plan for instruction in schools, evaluate programs, and students to make goals about their learning. It covers these elements: reading, writing, math, listening, and, as you'll see in the scores, also science for 7th graders. And then it tells the parents what the elements are covered in the assessment. So, Mrs. Jones, Ken's performance in relation to the standard, reading, writing, math, and listening, require him to have a scale score of 400 or higher to meet the standard, and in writing a raw score of 9. So if we look at his scores here, this is the maximum possible score in each level of content that he took the assessment in. Did he meet the standard in reading? He absolutely met the standard in reading. He meets the standard. If you look at the bottom, there's level 4 is above standard, level 3 is meet standard, level 2 is below standard, and level 1 is well below standard. So for reading, he is at a level 3. He met the standard with a score of 408. In listening, he met the standard, and in listening, there's just you meet the standard or you don't meet the standard. So he met the standard on the listening assessment with a scale score with a scale score of 421. In math, he was below standard, not far below standard, but below standard. The possible was 552, so his scale score was 378. And in science, he did not meet the standard either. They provide a science assessment for 7th graders. The possible score is 580, and he made a score of 389. So you can see, if you look at it visually, that he's approaching the standard in everything. This little gray area here is called a confidence interval, and that means that he's very close to meeting the expectations of that these standards are assessing. In writing, he did fine. As you can see down here, in writing, he had a scale score, a raw score of 10 out of 12. So he did very nicely with his writing, as we'll see below. So he, in all cases, if you look at it with the big picture, he's performing about average for students, but you can see that he's still struggling in math and in science. Let's see what's going on. Here we break down his performance in each of the areas. In each of these areas, he performed similar to or exceeded the performance of students who met this standard for the state. And then down here, he fell below the performance of students who are meeting the standard. So let's talk about what he did well. In reading and literary text, both in literary text and informational text, he seemed to be very capable in identifying main ideas and details and analyzing and interpreting the information from the text. However, when it came to critical thinking, which requires making logical conclusions and inferences and judgments on the information in the text, he's still not able to do those things comfortably. He's still below standard for that. In math, he met the standards, and he is quite capable in communicating his mathematical thinking process and making connections with other real-life situations in the math concepts that he's learning. His basic skills in measurement, geometry, and basic algebra meet the standards. Where he still has difficulty are in mathematical processes, very similar to his reading difficulties, solving problems, and reasoning logically. His number sense does not meet standard at this time, and probability and statistics skills he does not meet that standard. And we'll need to talk about what we've done in class to meet those, or to teach those. And we'll talk about that after we talk about this test, this assessment. In science, Ken met the standard with regard to his understanding of the science concepts of properties and characteristics of elements, of systems and interactions, and designing solutions to problems, which is hopeful in that designing solutions to problems requires critical thinking skills. So we know that Ken has these skills. He's just not well developed in using them yet. As you can see below, in where he did not meet the standard in science, was in analyzing or recognizing changes in matter and energy, the science processes, and in inquiry, which inquiry is really about asking questions and looking for information. And that's the whole science process, which also requires a certain level of critical thinking and making logical conclusions, inferences, and judgments. So this is an area kind of overall that Ken's going to need to work on, is developing his critical thinking skills, going beyond the obvious and looking for connections and making inferences about the data that he has that aren't just obvious information. His writing is really, he meets the standard in writing, content, organization, style, and conventions. He puts together a well-organized narrative. And we're happy that he has those skills. So, we'll stop here and recognize that one of the things that gives really rich information to any kind of assessment data is what goes on in the classroom, specifically when you're talking about standards-based assessment. So it was really hard for me not to make some interpretations based on a presumed level of instruction for Ken, because I don't know. So the idea when you're presenting these scores and interpreting them is to just be as neutral as you can and not make suppositions and yet still be supportive. In what you have for the assignment itself, there's a lot of information. I think what's important about this is that you look at all the pieces of the standards-based assessment. It's not just about the scores. You have explanations of the levels that explain how far below the standard or how far above the standard they are. You have a breakdown of their performance, where they met and exceeded a standard and where they did not meet a standard. But the problem here, of course, is that you don't know what the actual GLEs are, the essential academic learning requirements, which would be available to you if you were the teacher and in that state. So in Alaska, we have the Alaska Core Standards or content standards, and that's the information that would be assessed using this type of assessment. So with that, I think we've gone over the elements of a standards-based assessment, which is different than norm reference tests, because norm reference tests compare scores between students, and the standards-based test gives you student performance levels based on standards. So anything could be a norm reference test if you ended up comparing students, but that's not what this standards-based assessment does. In all cases, these assessments are snapshots of students' work in time. Anything can happen during a school day, anything can happen during an assessment period to influence the quality of their performance on an assessment. So an assessment is never the end-all in terms of identifying student skills and abilities. It always needs to be couched in the context of instruction and the student demographics and the context of learning. So with that, I'll finish the screencast, and I'll look forward to your assessment interpretations.